The story takes place across the northern Great Plains in the early 1700s, during a brutal era when European colonizers had already spread through much of the land. Forests were cut down to make room for expanding settlements, natural resources were stripped away, and native tribes were pushed aside through violence and destruction. In the middle of this harsh world lives a young Comanche woman named Naru, a determined girl with a deep passion for hunting. By her side is her loyal dog, Sarai, who follows her everywhere and obeys her without hesitation. One morning, deep within the wilderness, Naru trains alone with her small hand axe, sharpening both her skill and focus. While practicing, she suddenly spots a deer moving quietly through the trees. Excited by the opportunity, she immediately begins tracking it. But just as she prepares to strike, a deafening crack of thunder echoes across the sky, startling the animal and sending it sprinting away. Refusing to quit, Naru chases after it, with Sarai racing beside her. They run through the dense forest for quite some time, yet despite all their effort, the deer escapes. During the pursuit, disaster strikes when Sarai accidentally gets his tail caught in a hidden bear trap. The poor animal cries out in agony while struggling helplessly. Naru quickly rushes over and carefully frees him before the trap can cause even worse damage. Once he is safe, she uses herbs and natural medicine to treat the injury herself, showing both intelligence and compassion. Afterward, the pair prepare to head back home, but suddenly an unusual sound rumbles from above the clouds. Curious, Naru climbs toward a nearby cliff to investigate. As she looks up into the sky, she witnesses something impossible, a massive unidentified craft gliding silently through the clouds overhead. The strange sight leaves her stunned, and she becomes convinced she has witnessed a legendary thunderbird. Later, she reunites with her older brother Tob, one of the tribe's most respected hunters. Tob is known throughout the camp as an elite warrior and fearless tracker. Whenever the tribe organizes dangerous hunts, he is the one chosen to lead them. Naru excitedly tells him about the mysterious creature she saw in the sky and insists that she is finally ready to join the upcoming hunt alongside the others. But Tob dismisses the idea, warning her that hunting is far more dangerous than she understands. Not long after, Naru helps her mother prepare medicinal remedies for the tribe. While working, she sharpens her axe, clearly frustrated. Her mother asks why she is so desperate to become a hunter. Naru explains that strength alone is not what makes someone skilled. She believes her intelligence, instincts, and ability to think differently make her just as capable as the men. Unfortunately, her mother remains unconvinced. It becomes clear that within their culture, women are not viewed as equals when it comes to hunting and warfare. A little later, Tob returns carrying a bird he successfully hunted for food. Everyone else seems satisfied, but Naru barely reacts, still bothered by the lack of faith others have in her abilities. Meanwhile, somewhere far deeper in the forest, the mysterious visitor from the sky finally emerges. A terrifying alien predator steps out from the shadows. The creature carries highly advanced technology, unlike anything humans have ever seen: deadly laser weapons, heat-detecting vision, and even the ability to turn nearly invisible. To demonstrate just how lethal it is, the predator casually stalks through the jungle and effortlessly kills a massive snake with brutal efficiency. Elsewhere, Naru gathers medicinal herbs when she notices a group of hunters rushing through the wilderness. She soon learns that one of the tribe's men, Puhai, has been attacked and dragged away by a mountain lion. Without hesitation, she volunteers to join the rescue effort. At first, the men reject the idea immediately, believing she would only slow them down. However, Tob eventually convinces them that her medical knowledge could prove useful if they find the injured man alive. The search party spends hours tracking signs through the dense terrain. During the journey, Naru repeatedly demonstrates her sharp observational skills, guiding the group in ways the others overlook. Eventually, they discover Puhai barely clinging to life, his body horribly wounded from the attack. Naru immediately begins treating him using herbs and medicine she prepared earlier. Thanks to her quick thinking, Puhai survives. With the rescue complete, the group prepares to return home, but Tob refuses to leave the mountain lion alive. Determined to finish the hunt, he orders the others to carry Puhai back to camp while he continues tracking the predator alone. Naru, however, becomes suspicious. She points out that lions normally kill their prey immediately instead of leaving victims alive for long periods. Something about the attack feels wrong to her. She asks to accompany Tob, but once again he refuses. While heading back, Naru discovers something disturbing in the forest: the mutilated corpse of a giant snake torn apart in a way she has never seen before. Nearby, she notices enormous footprints pressed into the ground. The others assume the tracks belong to a bear, but Naru feels uneasy because the prints are far larger than anything familiar. Realizing something dangerous may still be nearby, she decides to warn Tob personally. Another hunter named Paka volunteers to go with her. After catching up with Tob, Naru explains what she found, but even he brushes it off as the work of a large bear. Despite her concerns, the three continue tracking the lion together. Naru comes up with a strategy for the hunt. She suggests using bait to lure the animal into the open while attacking from elevated positions in the trees. The group agrees with the plan. Soon, Naru and Paka climb into a tree overlooking the area while Tob places bait below before hiding nearby in the bushes. Before long, the mountain lion finally appears. But instead of moving toward the bait, the beast suddenly changes direction and charges straight toward the hunters. Chaos erupts instantly. The lion attacks Paka first, violently killing him before he can react. Then it slowly turns its attention toward Naru. Armed with a spear, Naru braces herself and prepares to fight back. For a brief moment, she believes she can handle the situation. But then she notices something terrifying hidden within the trees nearby, the invisible alien predator silently watching everything unfold. The shocking sight distracts her for just a second, and that moment is all the lion needs. The animal lunges forward and smashes into her, sending her crashing hard to the ground. Several hours later, Naru slowly regains consciousness and realizes she is back in her tribe's camp. Her injuries have already been treated, and it soon becomes clear that Tob rescued her from the mountain lion before bringing her safely home. Not long afterward, Tob himself returns carrying the severed head of the beast as proof of his victory. The entire village celebrates his accomplishment, and the tribal elders honor him by officially naming him the new war chief. While everyone praises Tob, Naru cannot stop thinking about the strange creature she glimpsed in the forest. Deep down, she knows the lion was not the true danger lurking out there. Still convinced something unnatural is roaming the wilderness, she once again tries warning Tob about what she saw. But just like before, he refuses to take her seriously. According to him, she still lacks the experience necessary to survive a real hunt. Frustrated that nobody believes her, Naru decides she will uncover the truth herself. At dawn the following morning, she quietly leaves the village with Sarai beside her. Once inside the forest, she begins improving her hunting tools. Using strips of bark and animal hide, she fashions a rope attachment for her axe, turning it into a returning weapon similar to a boomerang. After practicing for a while, she successfully kills a rabbit using the new technique. Proud of herself, she prepares the rabbit over a small fire and shares the meal with her loyal dog before continuing deeper into the wilderness. At the same time, the alien predator is also observing the natural world around him. Hidden among the trees, the creature watches a wolf stalking a smaller animal. The moment the wolf catches its prey, the predator suddenly attacks without warning and brutally kills it, as if testing himself against stronger and stronger opponents. Meanwhile, Naru continues searching for signs of the mysterious being. Eventually, she stumbles across a horrifying scene. Spread across an open area are several dead buffalo, their bodies completely skinned and mutilated. The sight deeply disturbs her because buffalo are sacred within her culture, representing life, honor, and generosity. Whoever slaughtered them did not hunt for survival, they killed purely for cruelty. Near the carcasses, Naru notices a strange rolled object lying on the ground, a cigar left behind by outsiders. Since she has never encountered one before, she has no idea what it is. After investigating the area, she presses onward through the forest, but disaster strikes when she accidentally steps into a muddy swamp. Within seconds, the ground beneath her begins pulling her downward. It is quicksand. Naru struggles desperately, but every movement only drags her deeper. Panic sets in as the mud rises toward her face, threatening to suffocate her alive. Just when it seems hopeless, she remembers the rope attached to her axe. Using it skillfully, she manages to hook onto solid ground and slowly pull herself free from the deadly trap. Covered in mud and exhausted, Naru heads toward a nearby river to wash herself off. Elsewhere, the predator eventually discovers the same cigar she found earlier, examining it curiously before continuing his hunt. Not long after, Naru encounters an enormous grizzly bear feeding on a fresh kill. Most hunters in the tribe would avoid such a creature entirely, but Naru sees this as an opportunity to finally prove herself. If she can kill the bear and return home with its head, everyone will have no choice but to respect her abilities. She quietly prepares her bow and takes aim. Unfortunately, at the worst possible moment, the weapon snaps apart. The sound immediately alerts the bear, which turns toward her with terrifying aggression. Suddenly, Naru goes from hunter to prey. She runs through the forest as the massive animal charges after her. Desperate to survive, she dives beneath a nearby beaver dam, hoping the bear will lose her scent. But the creature's instincts are too sharp. Sniffing through the mud and water, the bear locates her hiding place and begins tearing into the dam to reach her. Just as the beast prepares to attack, another monster arrives. The alien predator suddenly appears and confronts the grizzly head-on. What follows is a savage clash between two apex hunters. Despite the bear's enormous strength and fury, the predator completely overwhelms it within moments. Using his advanced weapons and brutal combat skills, he slaughters the animal with horrifying ease. Hidden nearby, Naru witnesses the entire fight in disbelief. Terrified by what she has seen, she immediately slips away into the river and swims as far as possible. The predator notices her escape, but strangely chooses not to pursue her. To him, she does not appear dangerous enough to be worth killing. Eventually, Naru reaches the riverbank where several men from her tribe find her. After she disappeared from the village, Tob had sent hunters out to search for her. Breathless and terrified, Naru tries explaining everything she witnessed: the invisible creature, the impossible weapons, the monstrous strength. But the men think fear and exhaustion are clouding her mind. Rather than listening, they insist she return to camp immediately. When Naru refuses, determined to continue tracking the creature, the hunters forcefully restrain her and tie her up so she cannot escape again. Unbeknownst to them, the predator is watching from nearby. Using his advanced vision technology, the alien scans the hunters and locks onto every weapon they carry. Moments later, the men hear an unsettling roar echo through the forest, followed by movement in the bushes. Instantly alarmed, they ready their weapons. One hunter fires an arrow into the darkness before cautiously approaching to investigate, but when he parts the bushes, he discovers nothing more than a harmless rabbit. The group bursts into laughter, mocking Naru for believing some terrifying monster is out there. However, the laughter stops instantly when three glowing laser dots suddenly appear across the hunter's chest. Before anyone can react, razor-sharp metal projectiles blast through his body, killing him on the spot. Chaos erupts. The frightened hunters begin firing arrows wildly into the forest in every direction. One of the shots accidentally strikes the invisible predator, briefly revealing his terrifying form. The warriors immediately charge into battle, but they are hopelessly outmatched. The alien tears through them with horrifying speed and precision, slaughtering them one by one as if they are nothing. During the chaos, Naru manages to free herself and flee into the woods. But after finishing the others, the predator turns his attention toward her and begins hunting her down. Naru desperately tries escaping through the forest, but her luck runs out when she suddenly steps into another hidden bear trap. The metal jaws clamp onto her leg, trapping her in place. Injured and unable to run, she watches helplessly as the predator slowly approaches through the darkness. It seems certain that she is about to die. But then something unexpected happens. The predator pauses after noticing her condition. Seeing her trapped, wounded, and unable to fight back, he decides not to kill her. In that moment, Naru finally understands an important detail about the creature's behavior. It does not attack helpless prey or those who are incapable of defending themselves. At that very moment, another threat enters the picture. A group of French fur trappers suddenly appears carrying rifles and hunting gear. Before Naru can react, they overpower her, strike her unconscious, and drag her away. Sometime later, she wakes up trapped inside a wooden cage at the hunter's camp. Dazed and exhausted, she looks around and notices one of the men casually smoking a cigar. Instantly, she recognizes it as the same strange object she discovered earlier beside the slaughtered buffalo. She realizes these are the outsiders responsible for skinning the animals. Soon afterward, a translator approaches her and tries questioning her about the mysterious creature roaming the forest. He wants to know what she has seen and where the monster can be found. Naru refuses to answer, remaining silent no matter how much they pressure her. To force cooperation out of her, the hunters reveal another prisoner nearby, Tob. Seeing her brother captured shocks Naru completely. Until now, she believed he was safe, but tied up and surrounded by armed hunters, there is nothing she can do to help him. Not long after, the French trappers drag both siblings deep into the forest. There, they tie them up as living bait, hoping the invisible creature will come hunting for them. Tob becomes anxious, realizing they have been left defenseless in the middle of nowhere, but Naru calmly explains her theory once again. Based on everything she has observed, the predator only attacks armed opponents or creatures capable of fighting back. Helpless prey does not interest it, and moments later, her theory proves correct. The predator silently emerges from the darkness behind the hunters and begins slaughtering them one after another. Panic spreads through the camp as men are ripped apart before they even understand what is attacking them. While the invisible alien massacres the hunters, Naru and Tob take advantage of the chaos to free themselves from the ropes. Once loose, Tob rushes off to find a horse so they can escape quickly. Meanwhile, Naru heads back toward the French camp after realizing Sarai is still trapped there. When she arrives, only a few hunters remain alive. Using speed, intelligence, and her newly developed fighting skills, Naru takes them down one by one. After securing Sarai, she prepares to leave, but suddenly the translator from earlier calls out to her. During the attack, his leg has been severed badly, and he knows he will die without help. Desperate, he offers Naru a deal. If she gives him medicine to ease his suffering, he will teach her how to properly use one of the French rifles. Naru agrees. She treats him using a special herb mixture that lowers body temperature significantly. While he teaches her how the weapon functions, they suddenly hear the predator's terrifying roar echoing through the trees nearby. Naru instantly hides behind a large tree while the injured translator collapses onto the ground, pretending to be dead. Moments later, the predator enters the area. Surprisingly, it seems unable to detect the translator at all. Because his body temperature has dropped, the creature's thermal vision can no longer track him properly. Watching this carefully, Naru finally discovers the alien's weakness, but the predator is far from foolish. Suspicious of the silent bodies lying around him, the creature begins stepping on each corpse one by one to test whether anyone is still alive. Most remain motionless, but when he crushes the translator's wounded leg, the man screams in agony. That single reaction seals his fate. The predator immediately realizes the deception and kills him without hesitation. Right after that, the creature notices Sarai nearby and activates the laser targeting system on its helmet. 3 red dots lock onto the dog, preparing to fire deadly metal projectiles. But before the predator can attack, Tob suddenly charges in from behind and strikes the alien hard across the head. The blow knocks the creature's helmet off completely. Without the helmet attached, the targeting lasers accidentally shift toward a nearby tree instead of Sarai. Seconds later, the metal projectiles fire directly into the tree trunk. Witnessing this, Naru finally understands how the weapon works. The projectiles automatically follow wherever the laser points, not the actual position of the target. Meanwhile, Tob continues fighting the predator head-on. Shockingly, he manages to hold his own against the alien for a short time. Using agility, skill, and sheer courage, he lands several powerful attacks that visibly frustrate the creature. For the first time, the predator is forced to take the battle seriously. Enraged, the alien activates its invisibility once more. Tob tries to track him, but the advantage quickly disappears. Within seconds, the predator sneaks behind him unnoticed and brutally impales him from the back, killing him instantly. Hidden nearby, Naru watches her brother die before her eyes. The loss devastates her, but there is no time to grieve. Knowing she cannot defeat the creature through strength alone, she escapes into the wilderness with Sarai before the predator can find her. The following morning, Naru discovers one of the surviving French hunters near a riverbank. This time, she turns the tables completely. She captures the man, cuts off his leg so he cannot escape, and deliberately leaves him behind as bait for the predator. Next, Naru takes the same cooling medicine that lowered the translator's body heat earlier. As her body temperature drops, she becomes nearly invisible to the predator's thermal vision. Everything is now part of her plan. Not long afterward, the predator arrives exactly as expected and begins searching for whoever set the trap. But despite scanning the area repeatedly, he cannot detect Naru at all. Then suddenly, gunfire erupts. Naru shoots the predator directly in the back of the head from a hidden position. Before the alien can recover, she steals his helmet and escapes deeper into the forest. Soon, she carefully positions the helmet in a strategic location, so its targeting lasers point directly toward the area where the predator will stand. Moments later, the enraged creature catches up to her, and the final battle begins. Naru attacks fiercely, engaging the predator in close combat. During the struggle, she uses the alien's own weapon against him and successfully slices off one of his arms. With Sarai helping distract the creature, she wraps a rope around him and drags him toward the same swamp where she nearly died earlier. The predator becomes trapped in the mud, but still prepares to fire his deadly projectiles at Naru. Confident he has finally cornered her, he activates the weapon system without realizing one crucial mistake. The helmet lasers are no longer aiming at her. They are targeting him. The moment the weapon fires, the metal projectiles curve through the air and slam directly into the predator's own head, killing the creature instantly. At long last, the unstoppable hunter is defeated by his own technology. In the final scene, Naru returns home, carrying the predator's severed head as proof of her victory. The same tribe that once doubted her now looks upon her with pride and respect. After everything she survived, Naru finally earns the recognition she always fought for and is ultimately declared the new war chief of her people. For years, the Predator franchise kept falling into the same creative trap. Every new sequel operated under the assumption that larger scale automatically meant greater impact. Larger explosions, more advanced weaponry. Expanded mythology, more predators, more chaos, more CGI spectacle, more sensory overload. But somewhere along the way, the franchise lost sight of what made the original Predator so effective in the first place. Its power came from simplicity. A group enters hostile territory, only to slowly realize they are no longer the hunters. They are the hunted. That's precisely why Prey feels so refreshing. Instead of attempting to reinvent the formula through convoluted lore or excessive universe building, the film strips everything back to its most essential form: one hunter, one creature, one unforgiving battle for survival. And honestly, that restraint is exactly what revitalizes the franchise. The brilliance of Prey is that it understands tension matters far more than spectacle. The film never buries itself beneath exposition or unnecessary explanations about the predator species. There's no oversized conspiracy narrative, no dense science fiction terminology competing for attention, no relentless stream of callbacks designed purely to remind audiences of earlier films. Instead, the story returns to something primal: wilderness, isolation, fear, survival. That's why the 1719 setting works so remarkably well. By removing modern weapons and advanced technology, the film forces the franchise to become inventive again. Suddenly, every encounter carries weight. Every weapon feels handcrafted. Every trap feels dangerous. Every decision feels urgent. And because the characters are so thoroughly outmatched, the Predator becomes intimidating again. That distinction matters because several earlier sequels gradually transformed the Predator into little more than a conventional action antagonist. But in Prey, the creature once again feels like an unstoppable force of nature. The film restores the fear and unpredictability the franchise slowly lost over time. What's even more impressive is how disciplined the storytelling feels. Modern franchise filmmaking often seems uncomfortable with silence. Dialogue, humor, references, and setup scenes constantly compete for attention. Prey moves in the opposite direction. It slows down. It allows scenes to breathe. It trusts atmosphere, visual storytelling, and carefully sustained tension. You learn through observation: tracks in the dirt, movement through the trees, animals reacting to something unseen, a strange presence slowly disrupting the natural order of the ecosystem. That stripped-down structure gives the film a sense of focus that many modern franchise entries struggle to achieve. And honestly, that's why so many audiences describe this as the strongest Predator film since the original. Not because it attempts to surpass the 1987 classic, but because it finally understands why that film worked. The original Predator succeeded because beneath the action, it functioned as a survival thriller, a hunting story, a strategic contest between human beings and something superior. Prey reconnects directly to that DNA. The movie never tries to overwhelm viewers with scale. Instead, it sharpens the formula until every scene feels intentional and precise. Very little space is wasted. There are no bloated side narratives, no franchise setup designed purely for future installments, no unnecessary mythology weighing the story down, just suspense, just survival, just the hunt. And after years of sequels attempting to become louder than the original, Prey ultimately proves something essential. This franchise was never meant to become larger. It was meant to become sharper. The moment the film reveals its setting, you immediately understand this story is pursuing something fundamentally different, not a futuristic cityscape, not another military operation deep in the jungle, not an oversized science fiction battlefield overwhelmed by explosions and digital spectacle. Instead, the story transports us to 1719 deep within the wilderness of North America. And honestly, that single creative decision changes everything, because the setting in Prey is not simply a backdrop. It becomes the soul of the film itself. The story immerses us in the world of the Comanche Nation long before modern civilization reshaped the land. Vast plains stretch endlessly toward the horizon. Dense forests feel untouched, mysterious, and dangerous. Rivers carve through valleys, while wind moves through tall grass as if nature itself is observing the hunt unfold. The wilderness feels alive, and that atmosphere becomes one of the film's greatest strengths. What makes Prey so immersive is how grounded the environment feels. You can almost sense the cold air, hear distant wildlife, and feel how isolated these characters truly are. The movie constantly reminds us that survival in this world already demands strength, awareness, and adaptability, even before the predator arrives. That detail becomes incredibly important because nature itself functions as part of the narrative. This world operates through a hierarchy of survival. A snake stalks smaller prey, a a wolf stalks the snake, a bear dominates the wolf, and eventually something arrives that exists above them all. The predator doesn't burst into the story like a conventional blockbuster villain. It enters the ecosystem like another apex hunter. That subtle approach makes the creature far more unsettling because the film presents it as a natural force intruding upon an already unforgiving world. And visually, this may be the most striking predator film ever created. The cinematography constantly balances beauty against brutality. One moment, the audience is absorbing breathtaking landscapes illuminated by sunrise or moonlight, and the next, blood stains the very same environment during an intense confrontation. That contrast gives the film an almost haunting elegance. The wilderness is beautiful, but it is equally unforgiving, and the film understands the value of silence. Modern blockbusters often overload every moment with music, dialogue, or nonstop action. Prey allows the environment to breathe. You hear wind moving through trees, footsteps pressing into grass, water flowing through rivers, distant animal calls echoing through the forest. The sound design transforms the wilderness into a living presence. Even the pacing benefits from the setting. Because there are no cities or crowded environments, every encounter feels isolated. When characters disappear into the trees, it genuinely feels as though they could vanish forever. The landscape is so massive and unforgiving that danger could emerge from anywhere at any moment. That atmosphere of survival is what makes the tension so effective. And then there's the cultural perspective. For the first time in franchise history, the story is told through an indigenous lens. We experience hunting traditions, survival methods, tracking techniques, medicine, tribal dynamics, and the relationship these characters have with nature. The film doesn't simply place Native American characters into a predator story. It builds the entire experience around their world. That gives Prey an identity unlike any other entry in the franchise. Even the existence of the Comanche language version adds an additional layer of authenticity and respect to the setting. It allows the film to feel less like a generic action story wearing historical aesthetics and more like a narrative genuinely rooted in its environment. And that authenticity matters because the setting continuously reinforces the film's central idea. Survival belongs to those who understand the land, not necessarily the strongest, not the loudest, the most aware. That's why the 1719 setting feels so perfectly suited for Predator. By removing modern technology, advanced weaponry, and contemporary conveniences, the film forces every conflict to become more primal. More intimate, more dangerous. Every weapon feels handcrafted. Every trap feels desperate. Every hunt feels personal. And because the wilderness feels so immersive, the predator once again becomes a genuine monster moving through the unknown. That is the true brilliance of Prey. It doesn't change the time period merely for stylistic novelty. It transforms the atmosphere of the entire franchise, and in doing so, it gives the Predator series something it desperately needed. A world that feels untamed again. At the center of Prey is not the predator itself. It's Naru, because beneath the survival thriller, the suspense, and the high-stakes hunt, this story is ultimately about one person trying to prove she belongs in a world that consistently underestimates her. And that's precisely why her journey resonates so strongly. When we first meet Naru, she is already highly capable. She understands tracking. She studies nature with remarkable attention. She notices details others overlook entirely. She possesses knowledge of medicine, survival, and hunting techniques. Yet despite all of that, the people around her still hesitate to view her as a true hunter. That frustration defines her entire arc. She exists in the shadow of warriors who have already earned the tribe's respect, especially her brother, Tob, who represents everything she hopes to become. He is confident, disciplined, admired by the tribe, the kind of hunter people instinctively trust. Naru wants that same recognition, not because she is driven by vanity or glory, but because she genuinely believes she belongs out there. And the film makes the smart decision to avoid presenting her as an instant action hero. This is where Prey succeeds in ways many modern franchise films struggle to. Naru is not introduced as someone magically superior to everyone around her. She struggles, she is overlooked, she makes mistakes. She misjudges situations. At times, she loses control. She is repeatedly overwhelmed physically. The movie allows her to fail, and that matters enormously because failure is what transforms her into a survivor. Every encounter teaches her something. Every mistake becomes part of her evolution. While others rely purely on strength, Naru survives because she adapts more quickly than anyone else around her. She observes patterns. She studies behavior. She learns how the predator hunts. And gradually, she realizes something crucial. This creature is not invincible. It simply believes it is. That realization becomes the turning point of her character arc. For most of the film, the predator underestimates humans in the same way many people within her tribe underestimate her. It mistakes intelligence for weakness. It sees prey where there is strategy. And Naru recognizes that arrogance long before anyone else does. That parallel gives the story its emotional depth, because Naru is fighting two battles simultaneously, one against the predator itself, and another against the perception that she does not belong. What makes her such a compelling protagonist is that the film never allows her to become physically dominant over the predator. The story never pretends she could overpower it through brute force alone. Instead, her strength comes from patience, adaptability, and understanding the environment more intimately than her opponent. She wins mentally long before she wins physically, and that's what makes the final confrontation feel earned for so many viewers. Now, yes, the ending did divide audiences. Some fully embraced her victory because the film carefully establishes her intelligence and instincts throughout the story. Others felt the predator became less effective in order to allow the protagonist to survive. But regardless of where someone stands on the conclusion itself, the strength of Naru's character arc is difficult to deny, because her evolution feels natural. At the beginning of the film, she seeks validation. By the end, she no longer requires permission from anyone to understand her own capabilities. And that transformation works because it emerges through experience rather than speeches or forced exposition. The movie rarely pauses to directly explain her emotions. Instead, you watch her confidence develop through action, through observation, through survival. Amber Midthunder plays a massive role in making all of this feel authentic. Much of her performance operates silently. Fear, frustration, determination, anger. You can see those emotions in her expression long before she says anything aloud. She handles the physical demands of the role convincingly while still making Naru feel vulnerable and human. And that vulnerability matters, because audiences connect with protagonists who earn their victories. Naru is not the strongest character in the story. She's the most underestimated, and Prey understands that the most effective survival stories are rarely about raw power alone. They are about resilience, about adaptation, about becoming dangerous precisely because nobody expected you to be. That's why Naru's journey leaves such a lasting impression, not because she is unstoppable, but because she refuses to remain invisible. One of the smartest creative choices Prey makes, and something that deserves far more recognition, is the relationship between Naru and Tob. Because without that emotional dynamic, the movie could have easily become just another survival-driven action film. Instead, it gains emotional depth and humanity. Tob is everything Naru aspires to become. He is respected, experienced, calm under pressure. The tribe views him as a natural warrior, someone people instinctively trust when danger emerges. Naru sees that clearly, and more importantly, she wants to earn that same respect for herself. What makes their relationship so effective is that Tob is never portrayed as a simplistic antagonist standing in her way. A weaker version of this story would have reduced him to a one-dimensional figure, constantly dismissing her abilities, but Prey approaches the relationship with far more nuance. Tob genuinely cares about Naru. He protects her. He worries about her safety. He recognizes her potential long before most others do. At times, he even quietly encourages her. But alongside that support, he still questions whether she is fully prepared for the dangers she is pursuing. And honestly, that doubt feels understandable, because the world they inhabit is unforgiving. One mistake can mean death. That realism gives their relationship an authenticity that feels grounded rather than manufactured. You can sense how deeply Naru admires her brother, even during moments of frustration. She wants to prove herself not only to the tribe, but specifically to him. His approval matters because he represents the standard she has measured herself against her entire life. That emotional layer quietly motivates many of her decisions, and Tob himself becomes essential because he represents what a true hunter looks like within this world. He is not reckless or arrogant. He is disciplined, focused, experienced. When he enters combat, the film ensures the audience understands exactly why he commands such respect. That's why his scenes with Naru carry so much emotional weight. Because beneath the survival narrative, their relationship is built on admiration, frustration, protection, and unspoken love. The film rarely overexplains those emotions. Instead, it trusts silence, body language, and subtle interaction. Sometimes a single glance between them communicates more than an entire page of dialogue ever could, and that restraint works beautifully. As the predator threat escalates, their relationship evolves alongside it. Early on, Tob still sees Naru as someone trying to prove herself, but gradually, he begins recognizing that she notices things others fail to see. He starts understanding her instincts, her intelligence, and her ability to adapt. That shift feels earned, because Naru stops asking for respect and starts demonstrating why she deserves it. And once Tob fully understands the scale of the threat they are facing, the emotional connection between them becomes even stronger. The story stops feeling like a simple, prove yourself, narrative, and transforms into something more intimate, two siblings learning to trust one another while confronting something seemingly impossible together. Those moments give Prey emotional grounding amid all the suspense and action. Without Tob, Naru's arc would still function, but with him, it becomes personal, because her journey is not only about surviving the predator. It is about finally standing beside her brother as an equal, and that's why their relationship becomes one of the strongest elements of the film. In a franchise largely remembered for spectacle, physicality, and creature confrontations, Prey quietly delivers one of the most emotionally human dynamics the series has ever explored. A huge reason the film succeeds as powerfully as it does comes down to one person, Amber Midthunder, because if Naru had not felt believable, the entire film would have collapsed under its own premise. The story asks the audience to follow a young Comanche woman standing opposite one of science fiction's most iconic extraterrestrial hunters. That is not an easy role to carry. One weak performance, and the film risks feeling like a gimmick rather than a grounded survival thriller. But Amber Midthunder anchors the movie from the very beginning. What makes Amber Midthunder's performance so compelling is that she never approaches Naru as an invincible action figure. She doesn't enter scenes projecting effortless dominance. She doesn't overpower every conversation. She isn't constantly delivering dramatic monologues designed to explain every emotion to the audience. Instead, she portrays Naru as someone who is continuously learning, observing, adapting. And that subtle approach is exactly what makes the character feel authentic. Many modern action performances rely almost entirely on charisma, but Midthunder constructs the role physically. You can actually see Naru thinking during scenes. Fear, frustration, uncertainty, confidence, anger, determination, all of it moves across her face even in silence. That restrained, observational style becomes one of the strongest elements of the film. Because Prey often prioritizes visual storytelling over exposition, Midthunder is required to carry entire sequences through expression and body language alone. And she accomplishes that remarkably well. When Naru is dismissed by members of her tribe, you feel the frustration building beneath the surface. When she realizes something unnatural is stalking nearby, you can see fear quietly emerging behind her eyes. And as she gradually begins understanding the predator's behavior, you can literally watch uncertainty transform into confidence in real time. That progression is what makes the performance so effective. Physically, she commits completely to the role. The action sequences feel believable because Midthunder moves like someone fighting to survive rather than someone performing perfectly choreographed heroics. She appears exhausted when the moment demands exhaustion, injured when the moment demands injury, desperate when survival becomes uncertain. Even during the film's most intense sequences, she never loses that sense of vulnerability. And that vulnerability is essential, because audiences rarely connect with perfection. They connect with struggle. Midthunder clearly understands that dynamic. Naru becomes compelling because she spends most of the film feeling outmatched. The predator is stronger, faster, more technologically advanced, and vastly more experienced. The only thing keeping her alive is intelligence, adaptability, and instinct, and Midthunder communicates that desperation constantly. You believe she is thinking her way through danger. You believe she is afraid. You believe she is evolving emotionally even when she is physically overwhelmed. That is not an easy balance to maintain, especially in a film with relatively minimal emotional exposition. What becomes especially impressive is how much emotional depth she creates without relying on lengthy speeches or overt monologues. Some performers require dialogue to communicate emotion. Midthunder often conveys more through silence than other performances managed through entire pages of writing. And that's why her work quietly becomes the emotional foundation of the film. Even viewers who had reservations about certain story decisions, visual effects, or the ending itself frequently still praised her performance. Because regardless of whether every narrative choice fully lands, Naru remains consistently engaging to watch. Now, not everyone responded to the performance in exactly the same way. Some viewers felt her emotional delivery was occasionally too restrained or carried a slightly modern sensibility within the historical setting. Others believed a few dramatic moments could have benefited from greater intensity, but even many critics of the performance still acknowledged how convincing she remained during the physical and survival-driven aspects of the role. And honestly, that restraint may actually suit the film perfectly. This is a character raised within a harsh environment where survival takes priority over emotional expression. Naru is naturally observant, quiet, focused. Internal, Midthunder leans into those qualities, rather than exaggerating them for dramatic effect. That decision gives the performance a sense of authenticity. What also strengthens the film considerably is her chemistry with Dakota Beavers as Tob. Their sibling dynamic feels natural and lived in, which deepens the emotional core of the story significantly. You genuinely believe these characters grew up together. The admiration, tension, frustration, and trust between them all feel real. And by the time the movie reaches its climax, Midthunder completely commands the screen, not because the film suddenly transforms her into a superhuman action icon, but because the audience has watched her earn every ounce of confidence step by step. That's why the performance resonates so strongly. Amber Midthunder doesn't simply carry prey physically, she carries it emotionally. And within a franchise built around one of science fiction cinema's most intimidating extraterrestrial hunters, she accomplishes something surprisingly difficult. She ensures the human being remains the most compelling presence on screen. One of the most surprising aspects of Prey is how much emotional investment the film creates with relatively limited screen time for many of its characters. Because honestly, the Predator franchise has never exactly been known for deeply layered character writing. In many entries, supporting characters primarily exist to be creatively eliminated during action sequences. And yes, Prey absolutely continues that tradition to a certain extent. There is bloodshed, dismemberment, chaos, and plenty of predator-driven carnage. But what separates this film is that several characters actually feel human before they become victims. And that small distinction changes everything. A major reason for that is how grounded the Comanche tribe feels throughout the film. These characters never come across like generic action movie placeholders waiting for suspense sequences. The movie spends enough time exploring their routines, relationships, hunting culture, and interactions that the tribe gradually begins to feel like a real community. That emotional grounding matters because once danger arrives, the losses carry emotional weight, and the strongest supporting character by far is Tob. Dakota Beavers gives the role a calm confidence that immediately makes him believable as the tribe's respected hunter. He is never exaggerated or overly performative. He carries himself like someone who genuinely belongs within this world. More importantly, he provides emotional balance for the story. His relationship with Naru gives the film its emotional center. Instead of becoming a simplistic obstacle blocking her progress, Tob feels layered and believable. He protects her. He doubts her at times, supports her at others, and gradually begins recognizing just how capable she truly is. That complexity makes him memorable within a genre where supporting characters are often treated as disposable. And honestly, many viewers became far more attached to him than they initially expected. Then there's Sarai, Naru's dog. On paper, it almost sounds amusing to describe the dog as one of the standout characters in a Predator film, yet somehow, it works perfectly. Sarai brings warmth and companionship into an otherwise harsh survival narrative. The dog becomes more than simple comic relief or background atmosphere. She actively contributes during tense sequences, participates in the action, and strengthens Naru's emotional characterization. That bond makes the quieter moments feel more alive. The supporting members of the tribe also reinforce many of the film's themes. Some underestimate Naru, some dismiss her ambitions. Others simply view her as inexperienced rather than incapable. But because the film avoids turning them into exaggerated caricatures, their reactions feel rooted in the harsh realities of survival rather than simplistic hostility. Even the French trappers serve a purpose beyond merely increasing the body count. They introduce another form of predator invading the land. Rough, exploitative, aggressive, and consumed by greed, they contrast sharply with the Comanche characters' far more connected relationship to nature. Their presence expands the world while also intensifying the atmosphere of chaos once the predator begins hunting everyone involved. That said, Prey is not entirely flawless when it comes to its supporting cast. Outside of Naru and Tob, several characters still remain relatively thinly developed. Many of the warriors, hunters, and trappers primarily exist to move the narrative forward or become casualties during action sequences. In many cases, you remember the atmosphere surrounding them more than their individual personalities, and that is probably the film's greatest emotional limitation. Some viewers understandably wanted more development for the tribe itself. More conversations, more bonding moments, more time spent with these people before the predator begins systematically tearing through them, because the film creates such a rich and immersive world that you genuinely want to remain inside it longer. Still, the emotional investment lands far more effectively here than in most modern franchise entries because Prey understands one essential rule. The audience has to care about who is being hunted. That's what creates suspense. If characters exist only as anonymous bodies waiting to be eliminated, the danger eventually loses impact. But the moment a film introduces even brief flashes of humanity, a quiet exchange between siblings, companionship with a dog, hunters protecting one another, fear gradually spreading through a group, every attack suddenly feels more intense and personal. And that's why the supporting cast matters so much. They make the wilderness feel inhabited, they make the danger feel intimate, and they give Naru's journey emotional stakes beyond simply surviving the predator itself. Because ultimately, Prey works best not when it focuses solely on the monster, but when it reminds you what is being lost every time the monster strikes. One of the most important things the film absolutely had to get right was the predator itself. Because after decades of sequels, crossovers, redesigns, and increasingly complicated mythology, the creature slowly stopped feeling terrifying. It became familiar, predictable, almost overexposed. But Prey changes that immediately. This version of the predator feels primal, savage, almost animalistic in its presence, and that is precisely why it works so well. The film introduces what audiences now refer to as the feral predator, and from the moment it appears on screen, you can immediately tell this is not the polished hunter from later timeline entries. The design feels rougher, leaner, more aggressive. The mask carries an almost bone-like tribal quality. Its body language feels instinctive rather than calculated. Even the way it moves through the wilderness feels raw and predatory. This predator does not resemble a futuristic soldier. It feels like a creature shaped entirely by the hunt itself. Now, the redesign absolutely divided audiences. Some longtime fans preferred the classic appearance from the original 1987 film, the iconic helmet, the recognizable facial structure, the more humanoid silhouette. For many viewers, that original design still remains unmatched in terms of mystery and intimidation. But the brilliance of Prey is that this newer interpretation actually complements the story remarkably well. The film takes place centuries before the original Predator. The technology is still vastly advanced compared to humanity, but it feels older, rougher, less refined. Its weapons are deadly, but not as sleek or sophisticated as the equipment seen in later installments. That detail quietly reinforces the timeline without requiring heavy exposition. And honestly, that stripped-back approach makes the creature frightening again, because the film focuses less on mythology and far more on behavior, and that is the key. Prey understands that the predator becomes most effective when treated like a hunter rather than a comic book-style villain. The movie spends an enormous amount of time showing how it studies prey, evaluates opponents, and gradually ascends the food chain. It hunts smaller animals first, then stronger creatures, then humans. The predator is not eliminating targets randomly for chaos or spectacle. It is observing strength, measuring resistance, searching for worthy opposition. Every encounter feels ritualistic. That hunting philosophy is what makes the creature so fascinating. There is almost a twisted sense of respect embedded within the way it operates. It does not destroy blindly. It analyzes, adapts, escalates. The film repeatedly shows the predator engaging targets based on perceived threat level, reinforcing the idea that hunting is deeply connected to its identity and culture. And because the setting is so primitive, the predator feels overwhelmingly powerful. Watching advanced extraterrestrial technology clash against axes, bows, spears, and handmade traps creates an incredible imbalance. Every encounter reinforces the reality that humans are completely outmatched physically and technologically. The predator can cloak itself, track targets with terrifying precision, slice through opponents effortlessly, overpower bears, neutralize trained warriors within seconds. And yet, what makes the film especially interesting is that the predator's greatest weakness is not technological limitation, it's arrogance. That idea becomes central to the narrative. The creature repeatedly underestimates what it perceives as weaker prey. It dismisses smaller threats. It relies heavily on dominance and superiority. And gradually, Naru realizes something crucial. The predator is not invincible. It is overconfident. That realization transforms the final confrontation from a simple survival sequence into a battle centered around intelligence, patience, and adaptation. Now, some viewers did criticize the climax because they felt the predator suddenly became less effective in order to allow the protagonist to survive. Earlier in the film, it moves through opponents with terrifying efficiency, so certain choices during the ending felt inconsistent to some audiences. But thematically, the film is clearly building toward the idea that the predator's obsession with superiority blinds it to specific dangers. And honestly, that concept has always existed within the franchise. Even the original Predator was never truly about humans overpowering the creature physically. It was about forcing it into situations where its confidence became a vulnerability. Prey continues that tradition beautifully. What also strengthens the film is how effectively it restores the Predator's mystique. We spend less time absorbing dense lore and more time simply fearing its presence. The creature often appears through movement, sound, shadows, or sudden bursts of violence rather than endless close-up exposition. That restraint matters enormously, because monsters become less frightening the more thoroughly they are explained. And Prey wisely avoids over-explaining. Instead, it transforms the Predator back into what it was always meant to be, a nightmare hidden somewhere within the wilderness, watching, learning, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. That's why this version feels so effective, not because it is larger, not because it possesses more gadgets, but because for the first time in years, the Predator genuinely feels dangerous again. The reason Prey works so exceptionally well ultimately comes down to one simple idea. The film completely understands the power of the hunter versus hunted formula. That is the true DNA of the Predator franchise, not explosions. Not oversized mythology, not sprawling science fiction world-building. The Hunt and Prey may understand that structure better than almost any sequel before it. What makes the film so effective is how constantly it shifts the balance between hunter and prey. At the beginning, everyone believes they understand the rules of survival. The Comanche hunters know the land intimately. They track animals, read footprints, survive through instinct, discipline, and experience. In their world, they are the hunters. Then something arrives that completely reshapes the hierarchy. Suddenly, the people doing the hunting realize they themselves are being observed by something smarter, stronger, and infinitely more dangerous than anything they have ever encountered. That shift creates the tension driving the entire film, and the brilliance of Prey is that it develops this structure gradually. The Predator does not immediately begin eliminating people nonstop. Instead, the movie first establishes the ecosystem itself, animals hunting other animals, creatures fighting for dominance, nature operating through survival and violence. Every scene quietly reinforces one central idea. Everything alive is either predator or prey. Then the extraterrestrial hunter enters that food chain. At first, the predator stalks smaller creatures. It studies the environment, tests its surroundings, and slowly escalates toward more dangerous opponents. That progression makes the creature feel intelligent rather than random. It is learning the terrain in the same way Naru is learning it, and that parallel is crucial. Because Prey is not simply about survival, it is about adaptation. Both Naru and the Predator spend the film studying one another. Every encounter becomes part of a larger strategic game where both sides are gathering information, testing weaknesses, and adjusting their approach. That is why the tension works so effectively. The Predator is physically superior in virtually every possible way: stronger, faster, more advanced, capable of disappearing into invisibility whenever it chooses. But gradually, Naru realizes something critically important. The creature hunts through patterns, and if something operates through patterns, it can be studied. That realization completely transforms her role within the story. At the beginning of the film, Naru is treated like prey by almost everyone around her. Members of her tribe underestimate her. The Predator overlooks her entirely. Even the French trappers dismiss her presence without a second thought. But as the story progresses, those dynamics slowly begin to reverse. Naru stops reacting emotionally and starts thinking strategically. She studies tracks, learns behavior, uses the environment intelligently, pays attention to mistakes. While everyone else either panics or confronts danger directly, she observes. And observation becomes her greatest weapon. That is what makes the hunter versus hunted structure so satisfying here. The film constantly evolves the balance of power. One moment, Naru is running purely for survival. The next, she is manipulating the battlefield, setting traps, and quietly shifting control of the hunt itself. The Predator believes it controls the game, but gradually, the direction of the hunt begins to change. That cat-and-mouse tension is where Prey becomes most effective. The movie understands that suspense is often more powerful than non-stop action. It allows sequences to breathe. Characters move cautiously through forests while distant sounds echo through the wilderness. Something invisible watches silently from the trees while everyone slowly realizes they are no longer in control of their environment. And because the setting is so primitive, every confrontation feels intimate and dangerous. No helicopters, no machine guns, no military reinforcement, just instinct against instinct, hunter against hunter. What also makes this structure compelling is that the Predator is not portrayed as evil in a traditional sense. It operates according to its own philosophy. It hunts worthy opponents, escalates challenges, pursues danger. In many ways, it respects strength. That creates an interesting mirror between the predator and Naru. Both are attempting to prove themselves. Both are learning through the hunt. Both are adapting in order to survive. The difference is that one of them believes superiority guarantees victory, and the other understands survival belongs to whoever adapts the fastest. That is why the final act feels so satisfying for many viewers. Not because Naru suddenly becomes physically stronger than the predator, but because she finally learns how to turn the hunt against the hunter. And honestly, that represents Predator at its absolute best. The franchise works most effectively when it becomes a deadly game of survival, where intelligence matters more than raw strength. When characters are forced to outthink something seemingly impossible instead of overpowering it through spectacle alone. Prey returns to that core idea beautifully. It strips the formula back to its most primal form. One hunter enters the wilderness believing it stands at the top of the food chain, only to discover something else has been hunting the entire time. If there is one thing Prey absolutely refuses to soften, it is the intensity of its violence. This film is brutal, not in the sense of oversized blockbuster destruction or sanitized PG-13 spectacle where characters survive explosions without consequence. This is raw, survival-driven brutality, intense, physical, unforgiving. And honestly, that intensity becomes a major reason the film works so well, because the predator should feel terrifying. For years, certain sequels gradually transformed the creature into little more than a familiar science fiction action mascot. But Prey restores the fear by making every encounter feel dangerous, painful, and unpredictable. When the predator attacks in this movie, it does not feel like a flashy action set piece. It feels like slaughter. Bodies are torn apart, limbs are severed, blood covers the environment. And yet, the violence rarely feels empty or excessive for the sake of spectacle alone. That is what separates Prey from many modern action films. The brutality here serves the tension and survival narrative. Every savage encounter reinforces how overwhelmingly outmatched the humans truly are. The movie constantly reminds the audience that this creature is not operating on equal terms. It is stronger, faster, more technologically advanced, completely relentless. One of the smartest decisions the film makes is the way it escalates the violence gradually. At first, the predator hunts animals. Small warning signs emerge, strange attacks, disappearances, subtle traces of danger. The movie builds suspense through mystery long before fully unleashing chaos. And when the violence finally erupts, it feels earned because tension has been quietly building beneath the surface the entire time. Then the film begins delivering one intense sequence after another. The bear confrontation instantly became iconic among audiences. Watching the predator overpower a grizzly bear is not only visually striking, it immediately communicates the scale of the creature's physical dominance. The film never needs exposition explaining how dangerous the predator is. It simply shows you, and once human combat begins, the movie becomes relentless. The action choreography stands out as one of the film's greatest strengths. Unlike many modern blockbusters that bury combat beneath frantic editing and rapid cuts, Prey generally keeps the action clear and readable. You understand where characters are positioned. You understand the danger surrounding them. You feel the physical weight behind each impact. That clarity makes the violence land harder. Axes crash into bodies. Spears cut through flesh. The predator's weapons dismantle entire groups with horrifying efficiency. And because the setting is so primitive, every confrontation feels more desperate and personal. Characters are not protected by advanced technology or endless ammunition reserves. Every attack requires proximity. Every mistake carries consequences. That primal style gives the film its identity. The action also succeeds because it consistently balances fear with spectacle. Some sequences are thrilling, others are genuinely unsettling. Watching the predator move invisibly through the trees while warriors desperately search the wilderness creates authentic suspense. You are not simply waiting for explosions. You are waiting to see who survives. And at times, the film becomes surprisingly artistic in the way it presents violence. Certain moments are framed almost like horror imagery, silhouettes moving through fog, blood-staining open grasslands, bodies collapsing beneath moonlight. The cinematography ensures the violence never becomes visually repetitive. At the same time, Prey never relies solely on gore to impress the audience. The film understands pacing and rhythm. It knows when to slow down, when to sustain tension, when to allow silence to dominate before chaos erupts again. That control makes the action sequences far more impactful because the film never overwhelms viewers with non-stop intensity from beginning to end. Now, not every action moment lands perfectly. Some viewers felt certain scenes stretched believability too far. A few nighttime confrontations become visually difficult to follow, especially during parts of the climax. Others believed the predator became slightly less efficient during the final act in order to allow the narrative to reach its conclusion. And yes, the CGI occasionally weakens the realism during certain animal sequences or larger effects-driven moments. But when the film focuses on grounded combat and physical survival, it becomes remarkably effective. What also matters is that the violence never completely overshadows the characters themselves. The action carries meaning because the audience understands who is fighting and what survival emotionally represents for them. That is why the kills land harder, because the movie gives weight to danger. And honestly, this may be the most savage Predator film since the original, not because it is endlessly trying to shock the audience, but because it remembers what made the Predator frightening in the first place. This creature is not a superhero, it is an apex hunter. And Prey makes every single attack feel like the moment Prey realizes it was never truly meant to survive the hunt. One of the smartest and most overlooked aspects of Prey is the way the film uses animals. Not merely for action sequences, not simply for atmosphere, but as part of the film's entire philosophy. Because from the very beginning, Prey continuously reinforces one central idea: everything in nature is hunting something. The film opens by establishing the wilderness as a living food chain. Smaller creatures are pursued by larger predators. Strength dominates vulnerability. Survival depends on instinct, awareness, and adaptability. And that thematic foundation quietly shapes the entire structure of the story. You can see it everywhere. A snake stalks smaller prey. A wolf stalks the snake. A bear dominates the wolf. And eventually, something arrives that stands above all of them. The predator enters the ecosystem, almost like a newly introduced species, invading the very top of the food chain. That is precisely why the creature feels so effective in this film. It is not treated like a comic book-style supervillain crashing into the narrative. Instead, it is presented as an apex predator testing the environment around it. That approach gives the movie a primal atmosphere that many previous sequels gradually lost. The animal encounters become crucial because they visually communicate the predator's hunting philosophy without relying on exposition. Every creature it confronts becomes part of an escalating progression. It studies prey, increases the level of challenge, searches for stronger opposition. The hunt itself feels ritualistic. And honestly, several of these sequences are unforgettable. The grizzly bear confrontation is probably the standout example. Watching the predator overpower such a massive animal instantly reshapes the audience's understanding of the threat. The scene is not there simply for visual spectacle, although it absolutely delivers that as well. Its real purpose is to establish dominance. Up until that moment, the wilderness already feels dangerous. Then the predator effortlessly neutralizes one of the most intimidating creatures in that environment. Suddenly, everything feels vulnerable. The wolf encounters function in a similar way. Throughout the film, wolves, snakes, rabbits, and other animals repeatedly reinforce the constant tension of survival within nature itself. Every creature is either hunting or being hunted. That symbolism directly mirrors the journey of Naru. At the beginning, she is underestimated by nearly everyone around her, viewed as weak, inexperienced, unprepared for the hunt. But as the story progresses, she gradually learns how predators think. She studies patterns, observes behavior, understands movement within nature itself. She adapts to the food chain rather than resisting it. That is why the animal imagery becomes so important thematically. The predator sees itself as the ultimate hunter, but the film repeatedly demonstrates that survival in nature does not always belong to the strongest creature. Sometimes it belongs to the most observant one, the one capable of adapting the fastest, and Naru gradually becomes exactly that. Now, technically speaking, the animal sequences also became some of the film's most divisive elements. Some viewers loved how alive and immersive the wilderness felt. Others felt certain animal behaviors became exaggerated or unrealistic at times. The CGI, in particular, received criticism during several sequences, especially involving the bear and some faster-moving creatures. In some moments, the digital effects look remarkably convincing. In others, they appear noticeably artificial. There were also complaints about certain animals behaving in overly dramatic ways, wolves growling constantly, bears roaring during movement, some scenes leaning slightly too heavily into cinematic presentation rather than naturalistic realism. And honestly, some of those criticisms are understandable. But even when the visual effects occasionally falter, the symbolism behind these encounters remains incredibly effective, because Prey is not simply showing animals randomly. It is constructing a hierarchy. Every encounter teaches the audience something about survival, instinct, and predatory behavior long before the human characters fully understand what is happening around them. The predator studies nature while simultaneously becoming part of it. That is what makes the film feel more thoughtful than a standard action movie. The wilderness is not simply background decoration, it functions as a system. A brutal ecosystem where strength matters, awareness matters, and hesitation can mean death. And the predator believes it exists above all of it, until Naru learns how to turn the rules of the hunt against the hunter itself. That is why the animal encounters matter so much. They are not filler. They are the film quietly teaching the audience its philosophy of survival long before the final confrontation ever begins. One thing becomes obvious almost immediately while watching Prey. This film looks absolutely stunning. And honestly, that visual beauty is a major reason the movie feels far more substantial than a typical streaming release. Because this does not resemble something designed to disappear casually into an algorithm after a single weekend. It feels cinematic. From its very first wide landscape shots, the film understands how to create atmosphere through imagery. The wilderness is captured in a way that feels both breathtaking and threatening simultaneously. Forests stretch endlessly into darkness. Rivers reflect soft morning light. Tall grass moves with the wind, while mountains rest silently in the distance like ancient witnesses observing the hunt unfolding below. The environment feels alive, and the cinematography is what gives it that presence. The camera often remains patient, allowing the audience to absorb the scale of the land before chaos erupts. Instead of relying on hyperactive editing or constant movement, the film trusts composition and atmosphere. Some shots feel almost meditative before suddenly becoming terrifying. That contrast becomes one of the film's greatest visual strengths. One moment, you are staring at breathtaking natural beauty, and the next, blood stains that same landscape during a predator attack. That visual contrast gives Prey its identity. The film constantly balances elegance and brutality, and honestly, this may be the most visually striking entry in the entire Predator franchise. The natural lighting deserves particular praise: sunlight filtering through trees, mist hanging above rivers, moonlight cutting through forests. The film uses nature itself to create mood and tension. It rarely feels artificial or excessively stylized. Even when the action intensifies, the environment remains grounded and immersive. That realism makes the violence land with greater impact. The cinematography also does an excellent job emphasizing isolation. Characters often appear tiny against massive landscapes, constantly reminding the audience how vulnerable they truly are. The wilderness always feels larger than the people moving through it. And then there is the framing. The movie uses depth remarkably well. Characters move through layers of trees, fog, grass, and shadow, while danger quietly hides somewhere within the image itself. Sometimes the predator is barely visible. Sometimes subtle movement in the background creates tension before characters even realize something is wrong. The film trusts visual suspense. And that trust matters because many modern blockbusters feel compelled to over-explain everything. Prey allows atmosphere to tell the story, but the visuals alone would not work nearly as effectively without the sound design. And the sound design in this film is exceptional. The wilderness constantly breathes around the characters. You hear wind moving through trees, footsteps pressing into grass, distant animal calls echoing through forests, water flowing through rivers. Silence lingering in the air moments before violence suddenly erupts. That environmental audio creates immersion. The predator's sound cues are especially effective. Every click, growl, movement, and weapon effect immediately generates tension. The creature often feels frightening before you even fully see it because the sound design tells you danger is nearby. And what makes the score especially smart is how restrained it remains. The music never overwhelms the film emotionally. Instead, it supports atmosphere rather than dominating scenes. Many modern action films constantly push oversized musical cues in an attempt to force excitement or emotion. Prey frequently allows silence to do the work instead, and that restraint gives the suspense far greater power. You genuinely feel the stillness of the wilderness, and when chaos finally breaks that silence, the impact becomes significantly more powerful. Now, visually, Prey is not entirely flawless. Some nighttime sequences become difficult to read clearly. Certain action moments lose definition because darkness and rapid movement overlap too heavily. And the CGI occasionally interrupts the realism, particularly during some animal sequences and effects-driven shots. But even with those shortcomings, the overall presentation remains remarkably strong. In fact, one of the greatest frustrations surrounding Prey is that it never received the full theatrical release many viewers felt it deserved. Because this movie feels designed for the big screen, the landscapes, the atmosphere, the sound design. The scale of the wilderness, the tension of hearing something moving somewhere beyond the frame, all of it feels cinematic in the purest sense of the word, and that is what separates Prey from many franchise sequels. It does not rely solely on action. It prioritizes mood, visual storytelling, the sensation of being trapped inside a dangerous world where beauty and death exist side by side. That's why the film lingers in your memory long after it ends, not simply because of the predator itself, but because the entire world surrounding the predator feels hauntingly alive. As visually impressive as Prey is, the film is not without technical imperfections. And interestingly, most of the criticism surrounding the movie does not come from its concept, performances, or atmosphere. It comes from the moments where the illusion briefly fractures, because when Prey works technically, it looks extraordinary, but when it stumbles, you feel it immediately. The most common issue for many viewers was the CGI. Now, to be fair, the film actually uses digital effects with far more restraint than many modern blockbusters. The problem is consistency. Some sequences look exceptional, while others suddenly feel unfinished or overly artificial. And unfortunately, the animal scenes are where that inconsistency becomes most noticeable. The bear confrontation is visually powerful from a storytelling perspective, but for some audiences, the CGI bear itself appeared slightly weightless and unnatural. Its movement lacked the overwhelming physical heaviness associated with a real grizzly. Other creatures throughout the film occasionally drift into that same uncanny territory, where the audience stops seeing an actual animal and starts noticing the visual effects behind it. And that becomes dangerous in a survival-driven film built around immersion, because Prey functions best when the wilderness feels authentic. Whenever the CGI becomes too visible, the tension weakens slightly. Instead of feeling trapped inside a brutal natural environment, viewers become aware they are watching digital effects. And the frustrating part is that the movie clearly looks strongest whenever it leans into practical filmmaking. The physical locations are stunning, the costumes feel authentic, the weapons carry texture and weight. Even the predator suit itself frequently looks impressive because it physically exists within the frame. That combination of real environments and practical elements gives the film much of its realism. But certain digital moments interrupt that realism just enough to pull some viewers slightly out of the experience. Now, compared to many modern franchise blockbusters, Prey still holds up remarkably well visually. Several viewers even argued that its effects appeared more consistent than much larger-budget productions released around the same period. But because the atmosphere is so immersive, the weaker CGI moments become more noticeable by contrast. Then there is the lighting criticism, and surprisingly, this became one of the film's more divisive technical discussions. A significant portion of Prey takes place within forests, shadows, nighttime environments, and low-light conditions. Visually, this creates incredible atmosphere. Moonlight filtering through trees, silhouettes moving through fog, darkness consuming entire landscapes. It all looks cinematic, until the action begins moving too quickly. That is where some viewers struggled. Several nighttime sequences become difficult to follow clearly. Characters move through dark forests while the predator cloaks itself, attacks suddenly, and chaos erupts in extremely low visibility. For some audiences, that confusion enhanced the tension because disorientation became part of the survival experience itself. For others, it became frustrating, especially during the climax. Some viewers genuinely walked away from the final confrontation uncertain about exactly what happened in certain moments. The geography of the action occasionally becomes difficult to process because darkness, rapid movement, and visual effects begin overlapping too heavily. And honestly, that criticism is fair. A few sequences likely could have benefited from clearer staging, slightly slower movement, or stronger visual emphasis to help audiences track the action more effectively. Some even argued that selective slow motion during complex moments might have improved clarity without sacrificing intensity. But what makes the criticism interesting is that the cinematography itself remains consistently beautiful. That is what makes the discussion so complicated. The film rarely looks unattractive. It simply occasionally prioritizes atmosphere over clarity, and depending on your tolerance for dark, moody action filmmaking, that either becomes part of the immersion or part of the frustration. There's also criticism surrounding realism and technical logic. The predator moves invisibly through forests without animals always reacting naturally. Certain injuries appear easier to survive than they realistically should be. Some plot devices, particularly the body temperature flower, felt overly convenient to certain viewers. Again, none of these issues completely undermine the film, but they do create small fractures in the illusion. And because Prey spends so much effort grounding itself in realism, atmosphere, and survival tension, audiences naturally begin examining those details more closely than they might in a louder or more exaggerated blockbuster. In a strange way, that is almost a compliment. The movie immerses viewers deeply enough that they begin taking the mechanics of its world seriously. Still, the technical imperfections are undeniably part of the experience. The CGI occasionally wavers, the lighting sometimes obscures the action, certain moments stretch believability, but despite all of that, Prey succeeds because its strengths consistently overpower its flaws. The atmosphere remains gripping, the visuals remain cinematic, the tension remains effective, and most importantly, the technical shortcomings never completely undermine the core experience. Because beneath every imperfect effect or overly dark sequence, the film still understands something essential. A great survival thriller does not require technical perfection. It requires immersion. And for most of its runtime, Prey absolutely pulls the audience into the hunt. One of the biggest reasons the film works so effectively is something many modern franchise blockbusters have almost forgotten how to do. It respects the audience's time. Seriously, in an era where so many major studio films feel obligated to stretch toward 2.5-hour runtimes filled with unnecessary subplots, universe building, sequel setup, and filler material, Prey arrives lean, focused, and remarkably confident in its structure. And that efficiency becomes one of the film's greatest strengths. This movie understands exactly what it wants to be. It never wastes time overcomplicating the narrative. There is no oversized mythology dump explaining every detail of Predator history, no unnecessary detours, no bloated comedic subplots slowing the pacing to a halt. The film strips the formula down to its essentials and commits to that approach completely. That is why the pacing feels so sharp. The opening act takes its time establishing the world, but it never feels aimless. Every scene is quietly building atmosphere, character, or tension. We learn how the Comanche hunters survive. We understand Naru's frustrations. We observe the wilderness and the natural hierarchy operating around the characters. And most importantly, the film allows suspense to grow gradually. That slow burn structure is crucial, because Prey does not immediately throw the predator into non-stop action sequences. Instead, the film builds mystery first. Strange signs begin appearing. Something unseen moves through the environment. Animals react uneasily. Hunters disappear. Small details slowly begin connecting together. The movie trusts anticipation. And that patience pays off tremendously once the violence finally escalates. When the predator eventually begins attacking openly, the action feels earned because the film has already spent significant time building dread beneath the surface. The pacing transitions naturally from survival drama into a full hunter versus hunted thriller, and that transition feels remarkably smooth. What becomes especially impressive is how little wasted material exists within the film. At roughly 90 minutes excluding credits, Prey moves with real purpose. Nearly every scene contributes something meaningful, whether it is character development, atmosphere, survival logic, or setup for later payoff. There is almost no narrative excess, and honestly, that feels refreshing. Modern franchise filmmaking often mistakes length for importance. Stories expand endlessly until they become buried beneath exposition, spectacle, and franchise setup. Prey takes the opposite approach. It simplifies the structure until nearly every moment feels direct and intentional. That simplicity gives the film momentum. Even viewers who had issues with certain story decisions frequently admitted the movie remained consistently engaging because it never overstays its welcome. The pacing continuously pulls the audience forward. Now, not everyone responded to the structure in exactly the same way. Some viewers felt the opening section moved slightly too slowly, particularly before the predator fully enters the narrative. Others believed a few additional scenes with the tribe could have strengthened the emotional investment even further. There were also criticisms regarding abrupt editing in certain sections. A few transitions feel somewhat rushed. Some scenes conclude quickly and move forward faster than expected. Certain viewers even suspected the streaming release may have influenced the final cut, making portions of the movie feel slightly trimmed down in order to maintain a cleaner runtime. But honestly, even those imperfections contribute to the film's efficiency, because Prey never becomes bloated. The movie always understands exactly where it is going, and that kind of confidence is surprisingly rare. Another reason the structure works so effectively is balance. The film understands rhythm. It knows when to slow down for atmosphere and when to release bursts of violence. Quiet tracking sequences transition naturally into suspense. Character moments evolve into action. The pacing constantly alternates between stillness and chaos. That rhythm keeps the film alive, and unlike many modern franchise action films, Prey genuinely trusts silence. Some of the movie's strongest moments involve characters simply moving through the wilderness, studying tracks, listening carefully, or sensing danger somewhere nearby. The film never panics and overloads every scene with dialogue or music. It allows tension to breathe, and that restraint gives the story maturity. Structurally, the screenplay also handles setup and payoff extremely well. Small details introduced early, tracking techniques, environmental observations, hunting methods, survival tools, all return later with purpose. The story continuously plants information that becomes important during the climax. Very little feels random. Everything feeds back into the hunt. That is why the final act feels satisfying for so many viewers. Not because the film suddenly invents solutions without warning, but because it carefully builds Naru's understanding of the predator step by step throughout the story. The pacing supports character growth, the structure supports suspense, and the runtime supports intensity. That combination is exactly why Prey feels so refreshing compared to many modern franchise entries. It does not drag, it does not over-explain, it does not collapse beneath oversized ambition. It simply tells a focused survival story with confidence and precision. And sometimes, that can be far more powerful than constantly trying to make everything larger. One of the most interesting things about Prey is that the film understands something many modern blockbusters seem to forget. Not every scene requires endless dialogue. In fact, some of the strongest moments in the movie happen when nobody says anything at all. That restraint becomes one of the screenplay's greatest strengths, because Prey is built around observation, survival, and tension far more than flashy speeches or constant exposition. Characters communicate through expressions, movement, instinct, and silence just as much as they do through words. The film trusts visual storytelling, and honestly, that decision gives the movie a sense of maturity. Many modern franchise films seem uncomfortable with silence. Characters constantly explain their emotions, deliver jokes every few moments, or repeat information the audience already understands. Prey frequently moves in the opposite direction. It lets scenes breathe. You watch Naru studying tracks, hunters scanning the environment. Even viewers who rejected the premise often acknowledged that Midthunder fully committed to the role. That is why the reception feels so layered, because Prey is neither a universally rejected film nor a universally adored masterpiece. It is a movie audiences responded to strongly in dramatically different ways depending on what they valued most. If you prioritize atmosphere, survival tension, visual storytelling, and thematic simplicity, there is a strong chance Prey works extremely well for you. If you focus heavily on realism, strict internal logic, or physical plausibility, the film's flaws become more difficult to overlook. And honestly, the movie's grounded tone may actually contribute to that division, because Prey feels realistic enough that audiences begin analyzing the details seriously. They debate survival logic, predator behavior, character decisions, hunting mechanics, the climax, the body temperature flower, the invisibility rules. People do not usually analyze disposable action films this deeply. That alone says something important. The film also became part of a much larger conversation surrounding franchise fatigue. Audiences have grown exhausted by endless sequels, reboots, and cinematic universes that often feel artificial or manufactured. Prey surprised people because it actually felt focused. It felt like filmmakers had a genuine creative idea instead of a corporate machine endlessly extending intellectual property. That authenticity helped the movie connect emotionally with many viewers. At the same time, nostalgia shaped reactions heavily as well. Some longtime fans wanted the exact tone of the original Predator and struggled with Prey's quieter, more atmospheric direction. Others appreciated that the film respected the original without simply recreating it scene for scene. And perhaps that is why the audience response remains so fascinating, because both sides have understandable arguments. The movie absolutely contains flaws. The logic occasionally stretches. The CGI sometimes weakens immersion. The climax divides opinion. Certain supporting characters lack depth, but at the same time, the atmosphere is powerful. The suspense works. The visuals are stunning. The pacing is lean. The Predator feels dangerous again. And for the first time in decades, people genuinely cared about a Predator film for reasons beyond nostalgia alone. That is a major accomplishment, because whether audiences loved Prey or rejected it completely, the film achieved something most franchise sequels fail to accomplish. It made people feel something strong enough to debate passionately. After years of disappointing sequels, messy crossovers, franchise confusion, and forgettable reboots, Prey finally accomplished something the Predator series desperately needed. It made the franchise feel alive again. And honestly, that may be the film's greatest achievement, because before Prey, many audiences had completely disengaged from this series. The original 1987 film remained legendary, but nearly every follow-up struggled to recapture what made that movie special. Some sequels focused too heavily on spectacle, others overloaded the mythology, some leaned into comedy, while others relied on crossover gimmicks. Eventually, the Predator stopped feeling frightening. It became overexposed, predictable. A franchise icon rather than a terrifying hunter. Then Prey arrived and reminded audiences why this concept worked so effectively in the first place: simplicity. The movie strips the formula back to its foundation: survival. One hunter confronting something stronger, smarter, and almost impossible to defeat. No bloated universe building, no endless exposition, no obsession with becoming larger than the original, just atmosphere, tension, the hunt. And that stripped-down approach completely revitalizes the franchise. The 1719 setting instantly gives the series fresh energy. The wilderness atmosphere feels immersive and primal. The Comanche perspective adds an identity the franchise never previously had. The Predator itself feels dangerous again instead of overdesigned and overexplained. Most importantly, the film understands suspense, and that is the key. The original Predator succeeded because it gradually transformed into survival horror. Prey taps into that exact same energy while still carving out its own identity. It respects the original film without becoming trapped beneath nostalgia. And honestly, maintaining that balance is incredibly difficult. Amber Midthunder's performance also becomes essential to the franchise revival. Naru works because she feels human, vulnerable, intelligent, adaptive. She is not written like an unstoppable superhero. She earns survival step by step through patience, observation, and resilience. That grounded character arc gives the film emotional weight. The cinematography is beautiful. The sound design is immersive. The action is intense and satisfying. The pacing remains lean and focused. The wilderness atmosphere constantly pulls the audience deeper into the story. And even when the movie stumbles, whether through uneven CGI, occasional logic issues, or divisive climax mechanics, the core experience remains gripping because the film understands tone. It knows exactly what kind of movie it wants to be. Now, does Prey surpass the original Predator? That depends entirely on what you value most. For many viewers, the Schwarzenegger film remains untouchable because of its iconic cast, unforgettable dialogue, raw action energy, and enormous cultural impact. That movie defined an era. Prey is not attempting to replace that. It is doing something different. It is quieter, more atmospheric, more survival-driven, less focused on macho spectacle and more focused on adaptation and tension. And for some viewers, that approach actually makes it emotionally stronger than many previous sequels. But even if you still prefer the original, and many people absolutely will, it is difficult to deny what Prey accomplished. This is the first Predator film in decades that genuinely feels necessary, not because it expands mythology endlessly, not because it exists solely to set up future sequels, but because it proves the franchise still contains real creative potential when filmmakers stop trying to imitate the past endlessly and instead focus on what made the concept timeless in the first place. The hunt can happen anywhere. Different cultures, different historical eras, different survival environments, and for the first time in years, audiences began imagining exciting new possibilities for the franchise again. A samurai-era Predator story, a Viking hunt, a medieval survival thriller, a wartime Predator film. That renewed imagination is enormous for a franchise that many viewers had already given up on completely, because Prey did not simply deliver a strong sequel. It restored confidence in the idea of Predator itself. Now, to be fair, the movie is not flawless. The CGI occasionally disrupts immersion. Some supporting characters remain underdeveloped. The final confrontation divides audiences heavily. Certain plot conveniences stretch believability. And depending on your perspective toward modern empowerment storytelling, Naru's journey may resonate deeply or may not work for you at all. But even with those imperfections, Prey succeeds where many franchise revivals fail. It remembers the emotional core of the series: fear, isolation, survival, a human being trapped inside a deadly game against something superior. That is Predator, and Prey finally understands it again. In the end, the film never needed to become larger than the original in order to matter. It simply needed to make the hunt feel dangerous again. And for the first time in a very long time, it absolutely did.